Can everybody hear me? Yeah. In 1991, I was 27 years old, and I just shipped a game called Prince of Persia. And I was having a great year. I'd worked really hard on the game. I was happy that it had shipped, and it was a success. The game was climbing the bestseller charts. And I had a kind of a weird year. I want to talk to you about that. It was, so I took a year off. I thought, I've been at my Apple II computer for a long time. I want to travel around the world and have adventures. I want to learn foreign languages, meet girls, fall in love, meet new people. And so the first place that I went was Salamanca, which, I was telling Ivan last night at dinner, I told him, yeah, after I shipped Prince of Persia, I took a year off and traveled around. He said, oh, Salamanca is such it's a great city. You can have so much fun there. And I said, yeah, there's nightlife, and it's a student town. It's a beautiful medieval town. And this is pretty much the story that I've been telling people for 20 years. I had a year abroad. I went to Spain and I learned Spanish. I went to Paris and I learned French. And I tell that story in a way that makes it sound like it was a really great year. The truth is, I was kind of feeling down that year. It was, I went to Salamanca in the winter. Have any of you been in Salamanca in the winter? Any hands? Anyone? Okay, so it's important to have good heating. So I was staying in a rented student apartment. I'd rented a room, and there was a rule that you couldn't, the students who were renting the room couldn't go into the kitchen when members of the family were there. And also the heating was not so good, and the blanket on the bed was really thin. So I remember waking up in the morning and being really cold, and kind of listening to the sounds of the people in the kitchen, the family having breakfast, and waiting for them to go away so that I could get up and go have breakfast myself in the kitchen where it was warm. It was, you can have a lot of fun in Salamanca, but strangely, I actually wasn't having that much fun. And the strange thing is, I had just shipped a game that was doing really well. The royalties were coming in. I had more money than I could spend, and I could have stayed in a really nice hotel. I could have bought an apartment if I wanted to. I really could have done anything that year, but it's as if there was some voice inside me that didn't want to celebrate, that didn't want to feel, like a big shot. That I went 6,000 miles away from home to a place where nobody knew me, to a place where, people wouldn't treat me like a big shot, but they would treat me like I was nothing. And for a long time, I sort of looked back on that year, and I was a little bit embarrassed that I hadn't had a better time. Because, if you'd asked me what I wanted, it's like, I want to be having fun. But there was something inside me that year that made me think that this was not the time to celebrate, that this was not the time to have fun, that what I needed was not to be raised up, but to be cast down, which made no sense. But now, looking back on it, I think it does make sense, because I had something inside me, and that was my shadow. And that shadow was telling me that this was what I needed, even though my conscious mind didn't know that I needed it. So today I want to talk to you about shadows. My shadow, and your shadows, because we all have them, and this shadow character in this 1980s 8-bit game. And I'm going to start with this guy, Carl Jung. Jung is a Swiss psychologist, and he came up with this idea of the shadow as all of the parts of us that we don't want. We choose the parts of ourselves that we want to be. We want to be a certain way. And then there are other things that we don't want to be. So all of those parts of ourself that we deny become the shadow. And this, here's an example of how this happens. And this is a magazine that was popular in America when I was a kid. And it's a comic strip where there's two brothers. Goofus is the bad brother, Gallant is the good one. And here on the left we have Goofus saying, "I wish I had no little brother," being really mean. And on the right, here's Gallant saying, "I'm glad I have a little brother," and he's being really nice. So our parents, or my parents, taught me certain values, like that. Starting from childhood, I learned, if I share with my little sister, that's good. If I push her down and make her cry, that's bad. If I build a block stack, my parents say, "Oh, great, that's nice." And if I leave a big mess and I don't clean it up, that's bad. So as we grow up, we learn like what qualities are supported. What are the good qualities that society wants us to have? And this is my own list of, these are some things that my parents taught me that, if you asked me, these are the ways that some ways that I want to be. So I'd like to invite all of you to, if you have a piece of paper, just take it out and write down 5 qualities that you have in yourself that you're proud of. 5 qualities that you're proud of that have helped you in your life. And if you don't have a piece of paper, you could just do it mentally. This is I wrote down more than 5, but I've had more time to prepare, so. And if you finished, if you got your 5 qualities, just raise your hand. Sorry?
The ones who wrote it down?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, just to get an idea. So, like when, it doesn't have to be absolutely everybody. We'll give you a little more time. Thanks. Okay. Now as the next step, if you've written down those 5 qualities, next to them, write down 5 qualities that are the opposite of that. These are mine. And raise your hand if you finished. Okay, so take a look at that second list, because that's a description of your shadow. And we actually have more than one shadow. The shadow is it's kind of a composite of all of the qualities that we don't want. And this is a list of some of mine. So Jung would say that we're born with a complete personality. When we're a small child, we have every quality that's possible. We're born complete. And then, as we grow up, we start to take these qualities that we don't want and cut them out of our personality. We don't want to be these ways. We want to be these ways. So by the time we're, say, 20 years old, we're left with a small slice of that original round personality. And that's our persona. That's who we want to be. That's the face that we show to the world, that we show to ourselves. and then we spend our life trying to be this way. So what happens to those, those other qualities, the ones that we don't want? What happens to those qualities that we disown? An American poet named Robert Bly says that what we do with these qualities is we put them into a bag, and we carry this bag behind us. And that bag contains all the qualities that we've rejected. And over time, as we mature and we become a better member of society, this bag gets bigger and bigger, and finally, it becomes their shadow. So the shadow is a great metaphor because when we're facing the light, our shadow is behind us, but we don't see it. And the brighter the light becomes, and the better things get, the darker and blacker the shadow gets. And here's a really important point. It's not that the shadow is bad, it's that we've rejected it, and that makes it turn nasty. Because the shadow wants to be accepted. These are parts of us. And the better a job we do of pushing down those shadow qualities and pushing them out of our life, the more energy we give to that shadow. So if we're very, very good, and we work hard and we do all the things that we're supposed to do, then we're carrying a shadow behind us that's really, really dense and black. And the brighter the light gets, the bigger the shadow gets. Okay. So that's Jung's idea of the shadow. And now I want to talk a bit about my own childhood and how I got started making games. This was my development system. And how many people here remember Apple II computer? A few, yeah. Most of you are too young. This is 1978, and I was 14 years old when I got my Apple II, and it changed my life. Before I had my computer, if you'd asked me what I wanted to do in life, I would say I wanted to be a cartoonist, or I wanted to be an animator. I wanted to make movies, tell stories. But if I wanted to play games, my option was this. I had to take a roll of quarters down to the local video arcade. I played Asteroids, Space Invaders, Pac-Man. The Apple made it possible for me to play computer games, video games, in my own home. Anybody here play either of these games? Sabotage, Shoplifter? Anybody remember these? Yeah, these were two of the early games that I was addicted to and really enjoyed. So the other great thing about the Apple was that not only could I play games at home whenever I wanted, but I could use this computer to make my own games. Yeah, and I taught myself to program, and I got the idea that maybe I could make a game that could be packaged and sold, like these games, and that could actually be a career, that could be a path in life. And I went off to college at age 17, carrying my Apple II computer, and I set it up in my dorm room. And I really wanted to be, I was 17 years old. I wanted to be successful in college, I wanted to be successful in life, and especially I wanted to make a computer game that would be published, that would be successful. That was my ambition. And this was my first game that was Anybody here seen this game before or played it? Okay, cool. This was my first published game. It was published in 1984 when I was in my junior year in college, and my favorite publisher, Broderbund Software, put it in a box, and even better, it became a bestseller. It was the #1 selling game in America in the year that I graduated from college, and this changed my life. It was the success that I'd been dreaming of, and it made video games, not just a hobby for me, not just a passion, but my real career. And it proved to my parents that, and everybody else that this was, I could actually earn a living doing this. So I'm going to talk for a minute about resume. We all have resumes, right? CV, and what we do is we list our accomplishments. A good friend of mine, Tommy Pierce, I'll be talking about her more in this talk. She showed her father a resume that she had written when she graduated from business school, and he read it, and he said, "Wow, it sounds like your entire life has just been a series of triumphs, ascending inexorably right up to the present moment." And of course, that's what a resume is. It's a story of success, just getting better and better. And the things that don't fit into that narrative, we don't put in our resume. So Karateka became the first line in my official resume. But today I want to read to you from a journal that I kept while I was making this game. And this is a journal that I kept in college. Now you'll notice that even though I had an Apple II computer, I didn't, this is actually a longhand journal. There's a reason for that. The Apple II only had capital letters. You couldn't do lowercase. And you could only fit about 4 pages in the computer's memory before it was full. So a notebook was really much better. So I'm going to read, this is basically a dev diary of when I was making Karateka and trying to graduate from college at the same time. So I'm going to read to you some excerpts from my journal. And as I read, I want you to keep in mind my description of myself and my description of my shadow. And tell me if anything that I read strikes a bell. Okay, this is the entry from April 11th, 1982. Well, it's Monday, and my psych paper is not all typed up and ready to be handed in. Maybe this has something to do with the fact that I haven't started writing it yet. 2 weeks later. There seems to be a distinct possibility that I will fail history. 1 month later. Well, I've been spending pretty much all my time playing Sabotage, watching TV, snacking, and reading. As my dad said on the phone this afternoon, it would be a shame to let the whole summer slip by that way. True. Tomorrow I will program. 3 months later. It really is worth it to get up early, exercise, and eat well. I must make these things a habit. 2 months later. Increased class cutting, decreased homework, going to sleep later and later. A mess is piling up on my desk. I've been putting things off. D- on my German midterm. 4 out of 10 on my computer science assignment. Yep, sloth is back. 6 months later. I haven't worked on Karateka in days. My room is a mess. The whole place is a mess, in fact. And my schoolwork is shit. I'm going to clean up my room. 1 week later. An utterly wasted day. I slept through both psych and geology, if you can believe that, and I didn't get to lunch until 12:30. Then I went to the record store, and I missed anthropology without even realizing it. 6 months later. Read Stephen King's Firestarter. I wish I'd spent the day working on Karateka. I really am a self-destructive bastard. Tomorrow morning, I'll jump out of bed and plunge into it. I actually published the whole journals online if you're interested in more of this. But as you can see, the whole journal reads like a battle between myself and my shadow. So what was going on here? It's looking back on it and reading something like 20, 30 years later, kind of puts it in perspective. I was in this struggle at the time, and I think what was going on is that I was trying so hard to embody the good qualities, that I imagined, like what kind of guy would, be able to get good grades in college and, make friends and be happy and all of that stuff, and also write a hit computer game in his spare time. So the quality's on the left-hand side, right? But then there was, by trying so hard to do all that, I was putting energy into my shadow, which was the opposite way, which just wanted to sleep late and listen to music and, you know, not really care about trying to be better or trying to achieve things. So it's like I would work hard for 2 weeks and the shadow energy would build up to the point where it would kind of, you know, like, you know, the way a steam engine lets off steam, because otherwise it's going to build up to the point where the boiler explodes. So it's like every couple of weeks I was letting off steam by just, you know, messing up for a few days, missing classes, forgetting to turn in an assignment, and then the shadow would be calm, and then I could start, you know, then I could work hard again for a bit. So this pattern of alternating bursts of being really good with periods of, as I saw it, being not so good, continued all through college, and it kind of worked. I mean, it was really inefficient, but I did graduate from college, barely. I didn't fail, and I did finish Karateka, and I got enough of the bugs out that I was able to ship it. So this kind of, you know, shadow battle of periodically letting off steam, it's actually a strategy that kind of, you know, it's kind of valuable. It kept me sane, at least. I had friends who, in college, who were much better than I was, you know, who, like, they were good at sports, they were, you know, socially they were successful at, you know, their parents were proud of them, everything was great, and then one day they dropped out. They didn't come back. And, you know, that, I'm just speculating, but maybe the pressure of being so good all the time built up shadow energy to the point where it just wasn't sustainable anymore. So, and I could see the potential for something like that happening to me, but maybe by being sort of confused and lazy and, you know, messing things up a lot, that kind of made it possible for me to get through. So this is me when I graduated from college. And you can see I've still got my Apple II development system. And you know, my friends went off to, you know, to medical school or law school or the Peace Corps, all the different things that you do after college. And I decided I was going to do another computer game. And I came up with a storyline, which I want to talk for a bit about the story of my next game, which was Prince of Persia, and where that story came from. This is a silent movie starring Douglas Fairbanks. And as you can probably see, it's based on the tales of the 1001 Nights, you know, a very ancient set of stories, which, I mean, were already ancient when they were written down. And this is, I can't even tell you like where the first time was that I had heard, you know, the stories of Aladdin or, you know, Scheherazade, but, you know, probably in children's books. So I think that there's something that, you know, we've all encountered them at one time or another. And because they're so old, they're kind of an expression of, you know, our collective unconscious, as Jung would say. And fairy tales have a meaning, which, you know, there's the surface meaning of the story, but then there's something kind of deeper that comes from all of us. I want to look at the title card for the opening scene of Prince of Persia. This is from the finished game years later. So it's, you know, a very classic story setup. I didn't think about it, you know, very hard. I think when I read my journal, I see that I wrote down the first version of the Prince of Persia story in about an hour. It just kind of flowed. And usually when that happens, it means that something's coming from our unconscious. It's coming from a very deep place. And I want to look at the first line of this story. When in the Sultan's absence, the Grand Vizier Jafar, the first line of the story says that the king is away. And I don't even know why I started the story that way, but a lot of fairy tales start that way. And Jung makes a really interesting point that in fairy tales, when we talk about a king or a kingdom, that has a meaning on two levels. First, there's the outer level, where in life we all have our kings, right? We all have our presidents and prime ministers. I grew up in America in the 1970s, which was the time of Watergate and Vietnam. And the feeling I got, that as a kid was that there was something wrong, that the king, the leadership that we had, wasn't like the good, true king like you read about in some storybooks. That it was, it was more like the Grand Vizier Jafar had somehow seized power, and that when the right king is not on the throne, then the kingdom suffers. Wars happen, the crops fail, the economy goes down, people are hungry, people blame the government. So when a fairy tale starts with the sentence, "The king was away," this actually resonates on a pretty deep level with what a lot of us actually feel to be true. There's a second level of a fairy tale, which is that the kingdom is actually our inner kingdom. That is, we're all born as kings, and our true self, our intact self, is the king on his throne. And then the first time that in childhood, say our parents don't have time for us, or they yell at us, or in school a bully pushes us down on the playground, or a teacher is mean to us, that king is pushed off his throne, and we realize that we start to cut away the parts of our personality that aren't accepted. And so the journey of a fairy tale is actually a metaphor for making ourselves whole again, for putting that original intact king that we were in childhood back on the throne. Next, we'll talk about the princess. Rescuing a princess is, that's a trope in many fairy tales and many video games. My previous game, Karateka, was also about rescuing a princess, which was kind of an embarrassment to me in college when I came home from summer vacation and I showed my friends this game I was making. Yale in 1984 was a very PC place, and my friend Katie looked at this and was horrified. She's like, "Jordan, how could you? Rescuing a princess, really?" I was like, "Well, I wanted to put some human interest in the game," and I thought, she's like, "But come on, a princess? Couldn't you be rescuing your son?" So I couldn't really explain why, but I just felt that rescuing, a son wouldn't have quite the same mythic resonance as rescuing a princess, and that it wasn't quite as satisfying. And Jung could explain why. Whenever we have a princess in a fairy tale, it's on the unconscious, of course, on the outward level, yes, princess is a princess, and by marrying the princess, you restore the kingdom and so forth. But on the unconscious level, since we're talking about an inner kingdom, the princess represents anima, which is our soul. It's the missing part of our soul that we need to become a whole person. And in life, when we fall in love, when we meet someone, we project anima, our soul, onto them, basically, and we say, this is the person that we need, that will complete us. At least that's what happens to me when I fall in love. And so the rescuing the princess, and when we meet a princess in a fairy tale, that's symbolic of this stage in our journey to wholeness, that we're restoring our soul. Okay, so enough about the mythological Jungian level of this very simple fairy tale story. And thanks for your patience in listening to this mythological stuff. Now I want to talk about what I was most preoccupied with at that time, which was how to get this fairy tale game onto an Apple II computer. What kind of game I wanted to make. And this was one of the big inspirations. It's, anybody remember this game, Lode Runner? Yeah. It's a puzzle-solving platform game. And I wanted to do a puzzle game like that. But there's something about, like many platform games at the time, your character had a kind of a floaty feeling. Like you would sort of fall and climb, but it never felt like your character really had weight. I wanted to do a game that would feel like you were really flesh and blood. And
give me the whip. Throw me the idol. No time to argue. Throw me the idol. I throw you the whip. Give me the whip. Adiós, señor.
So this movie of my childhood that had come out a few years earlier really inspired me because when I saw it, I thought, oh, it's the most exciting movie I've ever seen. And also, it's like a platform game. All the things that Indiana Jones is doing, running, jumping, that's what you're doing in Lode Runner, only you really feel it. So I wanted to do a game, this was my dream, to do a game where you would have the running, jumping, climbing platform gameplay, but if you missed the ledge, you could actually grab on with your fingertips and pull yourself up. And if you missed the jump, and you fell to the bottom of the pit, you would really feel like, you would feel that viscerally. This kind of a game would take really smooth animation. As I started to plan the game out, I ran into a problem, which was that I was actually not a good animator. I could kind of draw, but when I tried to animate these drawings in order, it completely lost the illusion of life. It just looked like programmer art. So I resorted to a technique which went back to the early days of silent film called rotoscoping. And this was a technique that I'd used in Karateka. It basically involves taking filmed movements, frame by frame, and then tracing each frame. And then when you play the frames in order, you get the illusion of motion. That's basically the idea. Now, for Karateka, I'd actually used a Super 8 film camera. But for Prince of Persia, because this was 1985, there was a great invention that had come out in the meantime, the VCR. And I decided I would use this awesome piece of technology that let me watch movies in my own home. It would also let me, I got a video camera, and I videotaped my brother David, who was 16 years old at the time, put him in a pair of baggy pants and a cutoff t-shirt. This is the parking lot across the street from our high school. So I had him run and jump and fall and do all the movements that I thought I would need this platform character to do in the game. So with that VHS full of footage, I moved to California. I started programming this game, and I then had to figure out how to get this video footage into the computer. And the problem there was that the Apple II, remember this was a 1978 computer, it didn't have a video input. Now of course we can just point a cell phone at something and press the record button and we're digitizing video into the computer. With the Apple you couldn't do that. So I had to sort of work around it. And the workaround that I figured was I set up a camera with 35mm film in it, still camera, and I took a picture of the TV. Then I did a frame advance, took a picture, frame advance, took a picture, and so forth. By the way, this required a VCR which had a really clean freeze frame. You know how when you freeze on a VCR it has snow? Well, I found a VCR that had a clean frame, but it was like a professional level VCR. It cost twice as much as the Apple II computer. And so what it is, I bought that VCR with a credit card, and I used it for one day to capture this footage, and then I sent it back. Yeah, because it had a 30-day back guarantee, and I couldn't really afford to keep it. It made me nervous just having something in my house that was so expensive that if I broke it, I would be responsible. So I had these still frames. I took the film down to the local 1-hour photo, got the film developed, taped them together, and I used a black Sharpie and whiteout to get a clean silhouette. And I then Xeroxed this page, so I had a nice black and white image. Now, there was a company in England which made a digitizer board for the Apple II. It was sort of this clever kludge that it took up one of the slots in the Apple, and you could plug in it's sort of a cheap black and white security camera. I mean, you couldn't digitize motion. That wasn't possible, but you could get one clean frame. And so I put this Xerox piece of paper on an animation stand, pointed the video camera at it, adjusted the contrast, and captured this one frame. And then I had an image that I could then go in with a pixel editing tool, which I also had to program because this was before Photoshop, and capture the frames, which I could then play back in order. So, and this was kind of slow because I also had to program with the tools that would do this. You know, the tool to do the pixel editing, the tool to play the frames in order. But when I finally got to the point of doing the first motion test, this is what it looked like. And I was thrilled to see that it kind of looked like my brother. You know, I could kind of feel that life, that movement coming through, which was exactly what I had hoped for. So after the cleanup and the pixel editing, only 1 year after I had videotaped my brother in the parking lot, I had this motion test. And it looked great. It was, you know, I had what I hoped for. And so this brought me to a stage in development that I think many of us are still familiar with today, which is that after a year of work, I had a great tech demo and no game. So the next challenge was to try to figure out how to build a game around this, and hopefully figure out a way that this animation could be not just an effect, but actually be fun to play. So 2.5 years after I'd started, this is what Prince of Persia looked like. And you can see it's got a lot of the elements of the finished game. You can fall to your death. Got loose floorboards that when you step on them, you know, they fall through. You've got torches flickering. And you know, there are pressure plates that when you step on them, the gates go up and down. There are spikes that spring out. I kind of felt like, you know, at this point, I thought I was 6 months away from finishing the game. And as my journal shows, I pretty much always thought that I was 6 months away from finishing the game for about 3.5 years. So I was sharing an office with my best friend, Tommy Pierce. She was making educational software, you know, in the office next to mine. And so, you know, I would show her what I had and, you know, trying to, you know, impress her, hoping that she would approve. And every time I showed her, she said the same thing. She said, "Where are the enemies? Combat, combat, combat. You know, you need to be fighting somebody." And so at this point, I would explain, okay, you're thinking of Karateka. That was a fighting game. This is not a fighting game. This is a platform game. This is a running, jumping, puzzle-solving game. Fighting is never going to be a part of it. And she said, "But that's boring. You need to be fighting." And so again, I would explain, look, I mean, there is violence in this game. I mean, look, you've got spikes, you've got slicers, you've got things that crush you. This is a game about a non-violent character in a violent world that's trying to kill him. You know, the whole point of the game is like you're clever, you know, you figure out how to solve the puzzles, you're agile, you're acrobatic, you can jump over things, you know, but it's not about fighting. Like, this character would never hurt anybody. By the way, does any of this sound like somebody who might be repressing certain shadow aspects of his personality? But beside the point, there was another practical problem as to why there could not be any enemies or any fighting in the game. Yes, the maximum memory of the Apple II in 1987 was 64K of memory. And just to put that into perspective, this is a 64K Apple II. The JPEG that you're looking at right now, which is not a super high-res JPEG, is 670K. So that 64K had to include all of the animation, all of the code, all of the shapes, the backgrounds, everything. And it was full. Because in creating that smooth animation of running and jumping and so forth, that took a lot of frames, a lot of memory. And there was nothing left over. There was no way I could add an enemy even if I wanted to. So I explained this to Tomi. And she would say the same thing. Combat, combat, combat. Which drove me crazy. Now, looking at my previous game, Tomi said, why don't you just do what you did in Karateka and use the same character for the enemies? Just flip them around and shift them over 1 pixel to make them blue. And I said, look, can't do that because in Karateka it worked because the character was very generic. It was just a karate fighter, and you can swap out the head, and then you have an enemy. But this character is like, he runs and jumps like my brother David. You know, he's got a certain personality in the way he moves, and that personality is likable. It's the hero. If the enemies move that same way, they're going to be cute and likable too. It's not going to work. And then I realized that there was an instruction in the Apple II microprocessor called exclusive OR. And it occurred to me that if I exclusive OR'd every shape, you know, every byte in the shape table with itself, shifted 1 pixel over, I might get something that looked kind of like a black and white shimmery outline. So I tried this out, and this was the result. Jump through a mirror, and you're split into 2. The hero remains, but he's weaker. And then the shadow gets half the hero's strength and then goes off to cause all kinds of trouble for the rest of the game. This is loud. Yeah, the shadow, in that example, the shadow steals a potion that you really want. Here's another way that the shadow messes you up. This is the end of the level. There's a gate that I really want to get through. These are all the ways that our shadow can mess us up in life if we reject him and disown him. Now, as soon as the shadow character was in the game, it was immediately obvious that it was more fun. Just having somebody else in the dungeons, you know, added so much. So I bit the bullet. I realized that Tomi had been right all along. Combat, combat, combat. And I had to go back and redo the entire game, reprogrammed everything to just be a little bit more memory efficient so that I would have enough memory to put in one enemy and the animation frames to sword fight. And this gave us the guard. This is again, this is the PC version. Yeah, having enemies even makes the spikes more fun because now you can push the enemies onto the spikes. Makes the slicers more fun too. Yeah. Basically, life just became more fun in all kinds of ways. You know, once you give your shadow self, you know, a little freedom, let your shadow loose a little bit. And this also, the shadow gave the, you know, the final boss fight. Here you have to fight your own shadow before you can save the princess. But the problem is that every time you hit the shadow, you lose 1 unit of strength because you're fighting yourself. If you keep fighting the shadow, you're going to destroy yourself. So the solution is to put down your sword and reunite with your shadow. Now, just as it happens that the way of winning this boss fight in Prince of Persia is actually exactly the way that Jung recommended that we should deal with our shadow. That if we spend the first half of our life resisting the shadow and trying to destroy it, at a certain point we should embrace our shadow and accept it and reabsorb our shadow into ourselves to make us a whole person. Now, I didn't actually know this when I was making Prince of Persia, because even though I majored in psychology and Jung had been assigned, I actually hadn't done that reading because of my shadow issues, as you could hear in my journal. But nonetheless, I think it was in the collective unconscious enough that somehow I knew to put it in the game anyway. And this brings us to the end of the game story. Where the hero can rescue the princess, Anima. The kingdom is saved. The hero becomes a whole person. And it's a happy ending to the game development story, too, because the game shipped and it was successful. Which brings me back to where I started, to the winter of 1991, when for some reason I spent a winter in a very cold place, and I didn't even buy myself a proper warm jacket, and I came down with a really bad case of bronchitis. Why did I do that? This is me shortly after Prince of Persia shipped. Notice the mullet, that tells you what year it is. And this is the office where I pretty much spent the last 4 years staring at a screen. So I'd really put I tried really hard to push my shadow down for those 4 years, because trying to make the game fun, trying to meet the deadlines, trying to get the bugs out, all of this, all of this required, that my shadow not interfere. So I think my shadow was pretty energized at the end of that year. And finishing a project, when I finished Prince of Persia and shipped it, at that point I'd been pretty much looking at my Apple II screen for 10 years. And when the game shipped, I think it kind of cracked open a window. It just, the end of a project, the end of a stage in life, that's a time when, I think we kind of confront the things that we've been pushing away in the previous stage because we had to. And in my case, I think I've been pushing down a lot of things, and one of them was probably sadness. This is Askeladden. He's the hero of Norwegian fairy tales, and you can see he's down by the fireplace, among the cinders, among the ashes. A lot of fairy tales involve characters who spend some time with the ashes or cinders. Cinderella is a popular one in English. Ashes are a symbol of death, in many cultures. In medieval Norway, there was a tradition, a coming-of-age ritual that young men, this is like Viking times, before they became warriors, about in their early teenage years, they would sometimes fall into a depression and spend a year, sometimes as long as a year, down by the cinders, just lying down, too depressed to get up, and barely eating, not doing any sports. And then one day they would get up, dust off the ashes, pick up a sword and a shield, and go out to become a warrior. So it's like the boy needed to die symbolically in order to be reborn, as a warrior. Now, we don't have ash rituals in our modern society. We're supposed to graduate from college, graduate from high school, and then go on to college, in a good mood. And then we graduate from college and we go on to get our first job, and this is something we're supposed to be proud and happy about too. Every promotion, every change in life stage, it's just all good, and we should be happy about it. So I think this is building up. In my case at least, I was building up a shadow that needed to be sad. For reasons that I couldn't explain. It's like I hadn't had an ash ritual. I think I was following a pattern of something that one of the archetypes that Jung called the eternal boy. And this happens to, I mean, I think in our society this happens to a lot of us, but especially those of us who have a success at an early age, who like we don't suffer as much as other people. Things go great, and in my case, when I was 27, I had just shipped 2 hit games. I felt I was on top of the world. Everything was great, and I think something inside me just felt like that couldn't go on. Fairy tales know this. This is Icarus, who flew. The boy who put on wings and flew toward the sun, and then his wings melted and he fell into the sea. Every fairy tale, where there's a rise, there has to be a fall. But in life, we're taught that we're supposed to just keep rising and rising. I think I was kind of an eternal boy at age 27, and if you'd asked me, I couldn't have explained any of that. I could have said, no, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to have a bad year. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy my life and have an even bigger success with the next thing I do. That's what I thought I wanted. But I think my shadow knew that there was a backlog of grief, of sadness, of all kinds of things that I hadn't been allowing myself to feel. And so I think in that year after Prince of Persia shipped, by going 6,000 miles from home to a place where nobody knew me, to live really the smallest life that I could think of, to say no to all of the opportunities that were coming in and just kind of hide from the world. I think at some level that was actually what I needed, and that by doing that, I discharged a lot of shadow energy, and that gave me the strength, the energy to go on and then do what turned out to be my most demanding and most ambitious project yet, a game called The Last Express. Now, The Last Express is anybody here play that game? Or wow. It takes place in 1914, right before the outbreak of World War I, on a train crossing Europe, and it's really about the beginning of that war. And Last Express, because it's about World War I, it's really also a story about a shadow, because it's not just individuals who have shadows, but nations do as well. And you could look at that war of 1914 as an explosion of the repressed shadow energy of all the great powers of Europe, which for decades had been at peace and prosperity. Anyway, that's one way to look at war as after a long period of peace, as an explosion of all the things, all the elements in society that we don't admit, that we feel shouldn't be there. This is Tommy Pierce, who I was telling you about before, who told me, combat, combat, combat. Tommy was the co-writer of The Last Express, and she passed away 5 years ago. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge her contribution to those games and to my life. She was my best friend, and I really miss her. How are we doing on time, Ivan? Do we need to break? No? Okay. I have, if we have a little time left, I wanted to tell you about some ways that I've found of inviting the shadow back into my own life consciously, so that the shadow doesn't come and bite me and cause problems. How do you guys feel? Are we okay for another 10 minutes? Or? Good? Yeah? Okay. So I already mentioned in my journals you saw one clue as to how I know when my shadow is energized and is spilling over into my life. It's when I find myself sabotaging my own efforts. Like I really mean to do something, but then I forget. Or say, for example, I'm really trying to be nice, but then I find myself like being kind of mean and snappish. That this is, I'm doing the opposite of what I plan to do. Another clue, anytime I find myself feeling like really angry and upset, like I've just got this voice going in my head, going, I just can't seem to let go of something. I can ask myself, okay, what part of me is saying this? Because I've got all these different voices, inside me at all times. What part of me is doing this angry monologue? Because often that's one of my shadows. And listening to that monologue is a way to kind of tune in. Dreams are another great one. All the characters in our dreams are us, right? I mean, I might dream about, my wife, or, my school teacher from when I was a kid, or my neighbor, and it seems like it's them, but these are actually projections of myself. So these are shadows too. And when a character appears in a dream that feels archetypal, feels like a part of me, I can, if I write down the dream quickly enough after I wake up, I can remember what was that character doing and saying, and then I can think about what's that character trying to tell me? What does it mean? This is when I find myself really hating a particular person, like really angry. Because like most of the times, if something bad happens, I'm like, yeah, whatever, I can roll with it. But sometimes I just feel really engaged, like, just this person, just their existence drives me crazy. I can't believe they're getting away with this, and da-da-da-da-da. And I've realized that the people that when I get really upset at someone like this, it's not because that they're completely different from me and they have nothing to do with me. It's actually, there's probably a quality in them that's one of my shadow qualities that I'm really trying hard to not face, that I have within myself too. So if I'm angry at someone out, I think, well, what is it in them that's making me angry, and where is that quality in myself? So all of these are clues that can help me kind of identify who my shadows are. And once I've done that, once I've gotten a clue as to who the shadow might be, there's something called active imagination, which it's kind of a meditation. If I close my eyes and try to conjure up this shadow, this character that's within me, and ask it a question like, for example, who are you? What do you want? Sometimes I can start a dialogue going where that character will talk back to me and will say the most surprising things. On a recent business trip, I was going through, trying to do a lot of things. I have a lot of plates in the air at any time, and sometimes I feel kind of overwhelmed, like I'm trying to do too much. And on this trip in particular, I came into contact with a shadow character who I call the Eternal Bachelor. And he's not married, he doesn't have kids, he never started a company, he doesn't have a house, he doesn't have a lot of people depending on him, he doesn't have like a lot of projects. His life is simple. And what this character was saying to me is, why are you burdening yourself with all this stuff? Don't you want to be like me and just, hang out in a cafe and have a good time and not worry about anything? So, in talking to this character, I realized that there's a part of me that actually doesn't want to be a family man, that doesn't want to be busy, that doesn't want to be needed. I just want to be free. And so I made a deal with this character. I asked him in my imagination, I asked, what would make you feel honored? What would make you feel like I was paying attention to you? And one of the things that I do is, whenever I can, especially if I'm in a foreign city or if I'm out on my own, I go to a cafe and I have a cup of coffee. And I keep a sketchbook, and I like to do sketches of people around me, and it's just me. I don't answer my phone. I don't work on any projects. You know, I don't call home and find out how everybody's doing. It's just a moment. It's a little ritual, really. It's like I don't need to go to a cafe because I have a coffee maker at home in my kitchen, and I have a home office where I can work. But by just taking that moment in a cafe, if I do it in a conscious way, I'm actually honoring this character. That's actually a picture of Leonard Cohen, by the way. I just picked him because he looks kind of like the image of the Eternal Bachelor that I have in my imagination. So this kind of ritual, if we do it consciously, can actually calm down our shadows. Because for the unconscious, whether we're doing something symbolically or doing it for real, it kind of feels the same. And I've got a few other rituals like that. I like to listen to rap music, like really vulgar, angry, like rap music. You know, and Eminem is one of my favorites. And some of this music, like the lyrics are really offensive. It doesn't match my values at all. But strangely enough, after I've listened to some really angry rap, I actually feel calmer. Sometimes I like to get ice cream just for myself, and I don't bring it home to the family, and I don't tell them that I went and I got an ice cream cone. It's amazing how happy that makes me feel. Another little deal that I made with one of my shadows, whenever I have a meeting on the west side of Los Angeles, you know, if I'm like 10 minutes from the beach, I drive to the beach, I park, I take off my shoes, and I just walk out to the ocean. And I just for 30 seconds or a minute, I just stand with my feet in the surf, and then I go back and I get in my car and I drive home. It takes 15 minutes, but because I spend so much of my life driving around, going to air-conditioned offices, staring at screens, I feel like just standing in the ocean for 30 seconds kind of reconnects me with the shadow, one of my shadows that has a life that's much closer to nature. And I mean, it would be great if I could go off and spend 2 weeks in the woods, but that's not always possible. But even that symbolic moment in the ocean calms the shadow down. Another great way that I can indulge my shadows is in my choices of entertainment. Since I was a kid, I've liked violent, action-packed, horror movies, adventure movies, thrillers. And if we look at the content of most of what's on TV, most in the movies, I can't be the only one, right? This is of course GTA, which how many people here have played GTA? Yeah. It's one of the most popular games there is, and it's a pure expression of our shadow. It's all the things that are not allowed in society, things that we would never do. We would never want our children to do. We wouldn't even want our children to see us doing in a game. In GTA, we get to do them, and we get stars. So, Robert Bly, the poet I mentioned before, has a great image. He says that one thing we do with our shadows is that we roll them up onto celluloid, and we project them onto a screen at night. So I think games, movies, and this is also something very ancient. If we look at the fairy tales that were being told 1,000 years ago, Hansel and Gretel, the children pushing a witch into an oven. This is some pretty dark stuff, but even children need that. So games for sure. And by the way, we can also I also express my shadow in the way that I play games. When I have house guests, I try to be very, to be a good host. I'm nice to them. I'm generous. I share. But then as soon as we sit down at the table to play a game, I take their stuff. I stab them in the back. I do everything to try to make them lose so that I can win. And it's a game. It's symbolic. But why do we play games? We're expressing things that if we express them if we did them in real life, it would damage our relationships and get us into trouble. All right. Okay, so those are some of my shadows, and your shadows, probably want something else. And if you kept that list that we did at the beginning of the hour, if you're interested, that might be a clue, kind of a way to start thinking about this. before we go, I want to tell you about a shadow moment that I had, actually in the airport on the way over here. This was yesterday. I was flying in from LA, and I was really cranky and irritable. Like, things went wrong at the airport, and all kinds of things that, needed to get done before I left. I was just in a bad mood, and I was just feeling irritated. And I asked my wife if she would, if she would let me just vent for a minute. Just vent and say everything that was pissing me off. And she actually wasn't in the mood to hear me vent, and she let me know that. So, in desperation, she picked up a piece of chicken. We were eating Chinese food in the airport lounge. She held up the piece of chicken on a pair of chopsticks and said, "Tell it to the chicken." So at first I resisted because this also, annoyed me. But I was all right. So I started talking to the chicken. I told this piece of orange chicken, everything I was upset about this and about that, and the airline this and that, and I went through this litany of all the things I was upset about, and then when I was done, when I finished listing all the things that I was annoyed about, I felt this sadness well up inside me. And I realized that I had a shadow that actually, because for what I had been doing for the last few days, I'd been saying goodbye. I said goodbye to my kids. I said goodbye to house guests, who I don't get to see very often. And I was getting on a plane, and I have a wonderful life it's rich and filled with friends and family and people I love. And I'm always getting on planes and flying around and saying goodbye. And I realized that there's a part of me that hates saying goodbye. That there was a shadow, that I have a shadow that just wants to live in one place, like a village where I know everybody's there all the time, and I'm just there. And as soon as I gave voice to that sadness, all my anger melted away. And I told this to my wife, and I saw she teared up too. And then we weren't mad at each other, and everything was fine. And I was able to get on the plane and come here to Barcelona. And last night I went out with some great people. We had a wonderful dinner. We saw the fireworks. And, the part of me that's happy to be here, that's excited to be here, now can have a good time because I let the shadow that was sad and just wanted to stay home, just gave that shadow a moment, in a Chinese restaurant in the airport. A symbolic moment with a pair of chopsticks and a piece of greasy chicken, but sometimes that's all it takes. So, thank you.